When presidents make secret requests involving Hollywood's biggest stars, the truth is always stranger than fiction. This story reveals a side of American power that was never meant to be public. Subscribe to discover more classified moments when politics, entertainment, and human crisis collided behind closed doors. What happens when a president calls you at 3 a.m. asking for an impossible favor? Most people would panic. But when JFK asked Sammy Davis Jr. to handle Marilyn Monroe, what followed changed everything we thought we knew about power, loyalty, and the price of fame. This is the classified story of July 1962, when America's most powerful man needed help from America's most versatile entertainer. July 1962 was a dangerous time for President John F. Kennedy. The Cuban Missile Crisis loomed, civil rights tensions threatened to explode, and his administration faced scrutiny that could destroy his presidency. But JFK's biggest threat wasn't political, it was personal. Marilyn Monroe had become what intelligence agencies called a critical vulnerability. Her relationship with the president was an open secret in Washington circles, but more dangerous was her increasingly erratic behavior and her growing dependence on prescription medications that made her unpredictable. The situation had reached crisis level when Marilyn began making phone calls to the White House at all hours, sometimes coherent, sometimes rambling, always creating security risks that made the Secret Service nervous and the press curious. Enter Cal Neva Lodge, Frank Sinatra's casino resort on the California-Nevada border that served as an unofficial meeting place for entertainment industry figures, political operatives, and people who needed to conduct business away from public attention. It was there, in the early hours of July 28, 1962, that President Kennedy made a phone call that would reveal just how much he trusted Sammy Davis Jr., Mudge's unique combination of discretion, capability, and understanding of human psychology. "Sammy," came the familiar Boston accent over the secure phone line, "I need to ask you for a very particular kind of favor." Sammy had received calls from powerful people before, but something in the president's voice suggested this was different from typical political requests or entertainment industry business. "What can I do for you, Mr. President?" "It's about Marilyn," Kennedy said, using the informal tone that indicated he was speaking off the record. "She's having difficulties, the kind that requires someone with your particular understanding of complicated situations." Sammy understood immediately. In entertainment circles, he had earned a reputation for being able to handle delicate situations involving troubled performers, personal crises, and circumstances that required both competence and absolute discretion. "How serious are we talking?" Sammy asked. Kennedy's pause was telling. "The kind of serious where careers, reputations, and possibly national security could be compromised if not handled properly." The gravity of the situation was clear. This wasn't a request for entertainment or political support. This was a crisis management operation that required someone who could navigate complex human psychology while maintaining the kind of discretion that high-stakes situations demanded. "Where and when?" Sammy asked simply. "Tonight. The Lodge. Suite 417. And Sammy, this conversation never happened. What Sammy found when he arrived at Cal Neva Lodge that evening would remain classified in his memory for the rest of his life, not because of government secrecy, but because of the profound human tragedy he encountered in that hotel suite. Marilyn Monroe was arguably the most famous woman in the world, but the person Sammy found in Suite 417 was far from the confident icon the public knew. She was fragile, confused, and trapped in a pharmaceutical haze that made rational conversation nearly impossible. "Who are you?" she asked when Sammy entered the suite, her voice carrying the slow, thick quality that indicated heavy medication. "I'm a friend," Sammy said gently, using the tone he reserved for dealing with people in crisis. "The president asked me to come talk with you." Marilyn's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. She began crying with the kind of desperate relief that comes from finally having someone acknowledge that the situation was real and that help had arrived. What followed was not a romantic encounter, political negotiation, or celebrity meeting. It was a 3-hour conversation between two people who understood the crushing pressures of fame and the human cost of living in the public eye. "Everyone wants something from me," Marilyn said during one of her more lucid moments. "The president wants discretion. The studio wants performances. The press wants scandals. But nobody wants to know what Norma Jean needs." Sammy recognized the pain in her voice because he had experienced similar struggles with the difference between his public persona and his private self. Fame created isolation that few people could understand, and the pressures of maintaining public images often conflicted with basic human needs for authenticity and connection. "What do you need?" Sammy asked, treating her question seriously rather than dismissing it as the rambling of someone under the influence. "I need someone to tell me the truth," Marilyn replied. "Everyone lies to me. They tell me what they think I want to hear or what serves their purposes. But nobody tells me the truth about what's really happening." What happened next would demonstrate why President Kennedy had chosen Sammy for this particular crisis management situation. Instead of offering false reassurance or trying to manipulate Marilyn's emotions, Sammy provided what she had requested: honest assessment of her situation and realistic options for moving forward. "Here's the truth," Sammy said with the gentle directness that characterized his approach to all serious conversations. "You're in danger. Not from external threats, but from the medication you're taking and the people around you who benefit from keeping you dependent rather than helping you get healthy." Marilyn listened with the focused attention of someone who had been waiting months to hear someone speak honestly about her circumstances. "The truth is also that you have choices," Sammy continued. "Real choices, but making those choices requires being clear-headed enough to understand what they are and strong enough to implement them despite what other people want from you." What followed was a comprehensive discussion of Marilyn's options, ranging from immediate medical treatment for her prescription drug dependence to longer-term strategies for regaining control of her career and personal life. More importantly, Sammy provided something that Marilyn had been lacking for months: someone who treated her as a competent adult capable of making rational decisions rather than as a fragile object requiring protection or manipulation. "Can you help me?" Marilyn asked as the conversation neared its conclusion. "I can connect you with people who can provide real help," Sammy replied. "Medical professionals who specialize in prescription drug recovery, lawyers who can renegotiate your contracts to give you more control, and security consultants who can provide protection that serves your interests rather than other people's agendas." The transformation in Marilyn over those 3 hours was remarkable. The confused, medicated woman Sammy had found in the suite had been replaced by someone who was beginning to think clearly about her situation and consider practical steps for improvement. But as dawn approached, the reality of Marilyn's circumstances reasserted itself. The people around her, agents, doctors, studio executives, had financial interests in maintaining her current situation rather than helping her achieve independence. "Will you stay in touch?" Marilyn asked as Sammy prepared to leave. "Not for romantic reasons or business purposes, but as someone who sees me as a person rather than a commodity." "Absolutely," Sammy promised, and it was a promise he kept for the remaining weeks of Marilyn's life. What happened over the following 2 weeks would demonstrate both the effectiveness of Sammy's intervention and the tragic limitations of individual effort against institutional forces that profited from Marilyn's vulnerability. Marilyn followed through on several of Sammy's recommendations, beginning medical treatment for her prescription drug dependence and consulting with lawyers about renegotiating contracts that gave other people excessive control over her life and career. But the forces aligned against her recovery proved more powerful than her individual efforts at change. Studio executives, medical professionals, and personal associates who benefited from her current situation worked systematically to undermine her attempts at independence. On August 5, 1962, just 8 days after her last conversation with Sammy, Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her Brentwood home from what was officially ruled an overdose of prescription medications. The call came to Sammy at 6:47 a.m. It wasn't from President Kennedy directly, but from someone in the administration who wanted to ensure that all parties understood the sensitive nature of recent events and the importance of maintaining discretion about any interactions that might have occurred. "We're all very sorry for your loss," the voice said, using language that acknowledged Sammy's genuine concern for Marilyn while reminding him of security considerations. "The president wants you to know that your assistance during recent difficulties was deeply appreciated and will not be forgotten." The conversation was brief, professional, and laden with implications about the importance of keeping certain information confidential for reasons that extended beyond personal privacy into matters of national security. Sammy's response was characteristic of his approach to all serious situations. She deserved better than what happened to her. All of us who could have done more should have done more. What followed was a period of reflection that would influence Sammy's approach to similar situations for the rest of his career. He had encountered the limitations of individual intervention against institutional forces, but he had also experienced the satisfaction of providing genuine help to someone in crisis. Years later, when asked about his most meaningful professional experiences, Sammy would often reference not his performances or recordings, but the private conversations where he had been able to provide real assistance to people facing difficulties that couldn't be resolved through entertainment or public appearances. Fame creates unique problems that require unique solutions, Sammy reflected in private conversations with close friends. Sometimes the most important work you do is the work that nobody ever knows about. The truth about what happened in Suite 417 remained classified in Sammy's memory until his death, not because of government pressure, but because he understood that some stories serve the people involved better when they remain private, rather than becoming public entertainment. But the impact of that July evening extended far beyond the immediate crisis management situation. It demonstrated that authentic capability could transcend professional categories, and that some forms of service required skills that couldn't be learned through formal training or systematic preparation. President Kennedy's trust in Sammy's ability to handle the most delicate situations revealed understanding of capability that operated beyond entertainment industry categories. When national security required human psychology expertise, the president had chosen someone whose competence extended into territories that formal credentials couldn't adequately represent. The tragedy of Marilyn's death 8 days later served as a reminder that individual capability, no matter how authentic or well-intentioned, sometimes encountered forces that were too powerful and too systematically organized to be overcome through personal intervention alone. But for 3 hours in Suite 417 at Cal Neva Lodge, Sammy Davis Jr. had provided what the most famous woman in the world had requested: someone who treated her as a person rather than a commodity, someone who told her the truth rather than what served other people's purposes, and someone whose help was motivated by genuine concern rather than personal benefit. In the classified history of American politics and entertainment, there are many stories of power, manipulation, and exploitation. But occasionally there are also stories of authentic human connection and assistance provided without expectation of reward or recognition. The story of what happened in that hotel room represents one of those rare moments when capability was used for service rather than advantage, when discretion protected people rather than institutions, and when the most important work was the work that nobody would ever know about. Years later, historians studying the Kennedy administration would note the effectiveness of certain crisis management operations without fully understanding the human elements that made those operations successful. But Sammy Davis Jr. understood that some achievements couldn't be measured through traditional metrics, and that some forms of service created value that extended far beyond immediate circumstances. The phone call at 3 a.m. had asked for an impossible favor, but what followed proved that impossible situations sometimes required capabilities that transcended professional boundaries and operated according to principles that placed human welfare above institutional interests. In Suite 417, for 3 hours on a July evening in 1962, authentic capability had met genuine human need, and the result had been exactly what President Kennedy had requested: professional assistance provided with the discretion and competence that the situation demanded.